It's true. Across the globe, women aren't as prosperous as men. Gender inequality is a pressing moral issue, but we forget it has massive economic implications. If you were to put all of the women who don't have access to formal financial services in one place, they would make up the third largest country in the world. That means an entire population without bank accounts, credit cards, or other tools you and I likely benefit from daily. Prosperity for women starts with inclusive policies, products, and people around the globe, and the investment to make it happen. Welcome to the Making Finance Work for Women podcast. My name is Sonia Kelly, and I lead Women's World Banking's proprietary research division. Join me as I speak with changemakers around the globe to deconstruct the social and economic exclusion women face. We'll discover new evidence together and drive action to accelerate women's economic empowerment. Because a leg up isn't a handout, it's a global game changer. Welcome and thank you so much for tuning in to the Making Finance Work for Women podcast, now streaming on YouTube and available wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Sonia Kelly. If you're listening on YouTube, you'll be able to find additional insights and resources linked in the description of the video. We have a lot of new listeners. Welcome. Maybe it's time for some quick notes on the show and what you can expect. This is a show that's designed for anyone who's curious about or wants to learn more about women's financial inclusion. I've heard of policymakers, financial services providers, people from startups, people who work at multilaterals, people who work at foundations, civil society, and even my own mother enjoying the show. Hi, Mom. I'm the host of the show, Sonia Kelly, and my day job is serving as the global head of the Women's World Banking Institute. Now, our format is simple. I offer a quick overview of an issue, and then we bring on a guest to talk about it. Before we get started today, I'd like to give a special shout out to the sponsor of the Making Finance Work for Women podcast, Ernst & Young LLP. EY is a global leader working across assurance, consulting, law, strategy, tax, and transactions. EY teams ask better questions to find new answers for the complex issues facing our world today. You can visit their website at ey.com to explore their latest insights and services. Let's jump into the show. Today, we're going to be looking at kind of where we are. It's going to be like looking at a map and finding the "You Are Here" sticker. It's a great time of year to take a minute to recognize where we've come from and look ahead to where we're going in women's financial inclusion. And we're going to have some fun along the way, too. I'm going to ask our guests some wild card questions that will take us in new directions. Now, here are some of the things that I'm seeing from my vantage point, looking at that "You Are Here" sticker. The first is that new technology, including AI, may transform everything, but it's only going to work if humans know how to wield it. And by work, I mean it's only going to work for inclusion if we know how to wield it. We talked about this with our guest, Nicole Casperson of FinTech is Femme. Like having women at the table making decisions about technology that will affect women is a non-negotiable. We also heard this from Adriana Enab. Sheila Warren of the Crypto Council for Innovation is one of those leaders who's encouraging thoughtfulness as we work to shape new technology. And we caught up with her on how blockchain and cryptocurrency is changing the landscape. Thinking back to the last year as well, generative AI only hit the computers of normal people like us just about a year ago. And we saw in Davos in Switzerland at the World Economic Forum last year in January, or this year in January, that there were so many conversations focused on AI, excitement about AI, the impact of AI, and we haven't really seen scaled results yet of how AI has changed our global landscape for inclusion. And so that's something that is on our radar and not yet totally realized. We also at Women's World Banking worked on reject inference bias this year. It's a term applied to credit scoring. When we look at candidates rejected by algorithms from credit, we see that actually women in that group have higher credit scores than men do in many financial institutions. And so there are ways that we can audit technology and that we can then use technology to solve those challenges. Women's World Banking did direct work on algorithms for various purposes with 3 institutions in 3 markets on 3 continents this year. We also saw an uptick in AI-focused opportunities, conferences, and conversations this year. And again, really looking forward to seeing where those end up going. So yes, technology is here to stay, and technology in digital financial services is a double-edged sword. It can be a tool for inclusion, but also can be a tool for exclusion. And our responsibility as technology moves forward is to become responsible users and deployers of these technologies in a way that creates inclusion. My second insight where we are is that climate change is here to stay. We've urged financial inclusion problems must be solved as a result of recognizing that climate change is just here. It's the reality that we live in. There are 880 million women in climate vulnerable countries who would be unable to receive a relief payment if they experienced some kind of a climate shock or emergency. That is something we learned this year, and it's something that should really compel action. We heard from Kathy Boffman-McLeod of Climate Resilience for All that the immediate health crises for women that are facing extreme heat in the world cannot be ignored. She and I talked about the essential role of finance in solving these problems on an individual level. We also talked with Dr. Jennifer Riria of Echo Network Africa Foundation about what she's seeing in her home country of Kenya. Droughts and impossible heat are making business as usual just really difficult for women entrepreneurs to achieve. We saw that Indonesia moved its capital this year. Climate change is really, really shifting our global landscape and geographically, literally shifting our global landscape. So we continue to see that the women that we work with at Women's World Banking and women that we encounter all around the world are experiencing climate impacts. And financial inclusion will distinguish those who are resilient and those who are devastated. We see women leading these conversations and kind of essential to that. And we talked about women's leadership in the climate space with our guest, Bushle Goslar, the chair of the Lula board. In this context of climate and also thinking about other resilience needs, insurance is so powerful. And insurance is at a disequilibrium moment where creativity is required to solve challenges. I shared this year with our podcast listeners a really great study from IFPRI that showed women are more likely to buy insurance products because they're more risk aware. Women are the first ones to stop eating when their family is experiencing some kind of financial challenges. And so, of course, they're more risk aware. Insurance regulators that we encountered at Women's World Banking through our leadership and diversity program for regulators are very concerned about the gender gap in insurance uptake. Women are more likely to buy insurance if it's pitched to them, but women also are less likely to have insurance. So there's a gap there that needs to be solved. We saw some really interesting innovations this year. We saw insurance plus other products to de-risk insurance offerings and make it possible for farms and for businesses and for individual health to be insured. And we talked as well with Rose Goslinga about how her company, Pula, is disrupting the insurance industry in Africa by spreading risks across entire communities and even countries. Just a few more observations. We saw this year a real buzz around gender lens investing. We talked with Roerd Brouwer from the Global Gender Smart Fund about their launch of an innovative fund designed to achieve $700 million in assets by 2026. And Roerd shared his personal journey to understand the challenges that low-income women entrepreneurs face and how he worked to shift his own expertise and the expertise of his board in this direction. That was really inspiring to me this year. We've also seen continued interest in gender disaggregated data and women-centered design. These just are perennial topics, but this year we saw that it's not just the collection of gender disaggregated data that's important, but knowing what to do with it. And collecting gender disaggregated data is just the first step to women's financial inclusion. We had a couple workshops this year where actually policymakers invited Women's World Banking to come in and talk to the financial services providers across their market. We did this in Egypt and we did this in Rwanda. I thought that was really interesting that policymakers were trying to enable women's financial inclusion among the providers in their market. And it's a new play that I personally haven't seen before. Now, the policymakers we talk with, speaking of policy, are worried about new technology and not quite sure what to do about it in every case. In the Women's World Banking Tech Equity Program, which is a program designed to close the gender gap for women, we saw that demystifying technology is the first step. Industry experts and policymakers and regulators need to be talking to one another. And when we closed the door and had frank conversations between these groups, we witnessed the gap between the understanding of what these two groups, policymakers on the one hand and industry experts on the other hand, what these two groups are saying and what they're worried about. And so I think oftentimes we think solving tech challenges takes technology, but it might just take a conversation. And we also saw that solving challenges related to technology might require similar processes to solving other challenges. Along these lines, we talked with Sarah Ellenson from EY about how we're seeing a lot of enthusiasm among governments for central bank digital currencies or CBDCs. Nearly every country in the world is doing something on CBDCs, but we haven't seen inclusion as a result. And so this is a place where technology might need to go through a women-centered design process in order to be relevant to women. And then, of course, there's the consumer protection piece in all of it, which we discussed with Joanne Barefoot from AIR. We also discussed on the podcast some tremendous links between women's financial inclusion and real changes in women's lives. And this is my last observation, that financial inclusion is not an end in and of itself. It's something that enables real change in women's lives beyond finances. I mentioned resilience to climate change just a second ago. We also saw a reduction in harm or intimate partner violence when women have access to financial services, when they have a useful amount of money to be able to make choices for themselves. We've seen this year as well women's health benefits of financial inclusion. We've seen job creation, and we've seen macroeconomic benefits like stability and soundness of the financial system, which is really exciting to make those linkages between women's financial inclusion and macroeconomic stability. Our guests today are not only leading financial inclusion efforts on behalf of women around the world, but they're also my bosses. They're joining me from India, where they've been working this week. Their leadership has overseen the incredible impact of reaching 82 million women in the past 6 years alone. So today the table turns and I get to call the shots. Many of our listeners are probably familiar with Ellen Iskenderian, Women's World Banking's president and CEO. She leads our global work and also Women's World Banking's asset management arm. Welcome, Ellen.
Hi, Sonia.
We also have with us today Harsha Rodriguez, the Executive VP of Regional Client Services at Women's World Banking. In this role, she's responsible for overseeing the organization's work in select markets across Southeast Asia, South Asia, Africa, and Latin America and the Caribbean. Welcome, Harsha.
Thanks, Sonia. Great to be here.
And last but not least, Tom Jones, our COO, leads Women's World Banking's global operations. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks, Sonia. Happy to be here.
This is an audio format, but I think listeners always like to have a mental picture of who they are listening to. So to give our audience a fun peek into who you are, who would play you in the movie version of the Women's World Banking story? Tom, let's start with you.
Oh, I'm sticking with Clint Eastwood, Dirty Harry, 1970s.
All right. Harsha, how about you?
I would pick Meryl Streep.
Oh, interesting choice. Mary Ellen, how about you?
So at the end of a very long week, I think I'd have to pick a very old, like Gloria Swanson actress. But we were speculating before the podcast. I have on occasion been told I look like Marissa Tomei, so I think I'll have her play me in the movie.
I can see that. That's great. We as an organization are currently celebrating 45 years of making finance work for women, for their goals, for their needs, for their businesses. And on that note, Harsha, I want to celebrate you because you've recently been featured on our social media channels commemorating your Women's World Banking tenure of 23 years. Congratulations. I'm just going to embarrass you for a second by reading a quote from that interview you did. You said, "I cannot say that I work in women's financial inclusion if I just sit in my office in New York. Being able to travel and be in the field as often as I can has been important to me. It's where I draw my inspiration." It's where I draw my inspiration too. I totally resonate with that. And I wonder if you might be able to share a moment in 2024 when you met a remarkable woman who's been impacted by our programs and been able to achieve her goals, and like something that might have inspired you this year personally.
Yeah, I believe in that really strongly. And I will give you a story from yesterday, because Tom, Mary Ellen, and I were in the field actually just yesterday, met with a number of clients from one of our projects here in India. It was a little village called Abhaipur, 2 hours outside of Delhi. And there were a number of women that we spoke with, women agents, women clients, individuals from the bank branch. But there was this one woman in the group that was very empowered, and she spoke with confidence, with conviction. And she said, women have very different needs, and we're allowed to have different needs, right? Like I might want to buy a buffalo, and I might want to buy a cow, or I might want to buy some gold, and my needs are different from that of my husband. My needs are different from that of the household, and I'm kind of entitled to have those needs. And what I want from the bank is to give me information, because I know what I need. I know what I want to save for. I know what I want to invest in. And what I need is for the bank to give me a pathway, give me a solution in terms of how to meet those needs. I thought that was really articulate in the way she, shared that, because it's not like we have to tell women that this is what, you need to save for, and, this is a product that you need because it's going to help you to do this. They know, they absolutely, know, and they know that their needs are distinct. And I think it's really important for the institutions that are serving these customers to understand that those needs are different and what those needs are, so that they can provide, services and solutions that meet those needs. And I think that's where Women's World Banking comes in, because that's where we've, spent 45 years understanding women's needs, understanding women's behaviors, and working with financial service providers and regulators and policymakers to, ensure that we can share the way women think and behave and, operate, so that we can actually get relevant solutions that are accessible, affordable, convenient, because they know. We don't need to teach them, what their financial, needs are. They totally know, and they know what they want to do, and what the outcomes in their lives that they're seeking.
Mary Ellen, can I ask you to share a moment in 2024 when you met or became aware of a remarkable woman impacted by Women's World Banking in a way that affected you personally?
No, happily, because I have really been loving this 45 years series. The videos are great, and the the essays. Someone that I've been honored to know for a very long time is actually the subject of, I think, our most recent essay, Rosemary Michel, who was longtime vice chair of our board. Rosemary is 93 years young. She's extraordinarily sharp and just so wise and active. And I was able to interview her in her incredibly charming apartment in Zurich a couple weeks ago. And, just hearing her tell her story as an entrepreneur, there were not a whole lot of women entrepreneurs in Switzerland, 50, 60 years ago. And she inherited basically her parents kind of switched, slept, flew over her brother and left the business to her. And she grew it from a confectionery business to hotels and restaurants and bakeries all over Switzerland. She sat on the board of Nestle and Credit Suisse and a bunch of other companies, and got to know Women's World Banking a couple of years into our existence. And she just talked really beautifully about the partnership that she formed with Ela Bott, who was the first chair of our board, the founder of Sewa, and she felt like they were such a good pair. Ela was always the spiritual center of Women's World Banking, and she was very, very pragmatic. She talked about some of the women entrepreneurs that she met in the Dominican Republic and in Kenya through Women's World Banking, and just that sense time and time again of how much we share and how different our lives and circumstances might be, but as women, how much more in common we have than divides us. And she's been so inspiring to me over the years, and hearing her tell this story was just easily one of the, it was cold and rainy and awful outside, and we just had this warm conversation in her home, and it was just a really terrific opportunity to reconnect with the roots of Women's World Banking and what we're really about in many ways.
The work of Women's World Banking is not just the customers of financial services that we reach. It really is a whole community. It's kind of a space in which people are trying new things. People are getting inspired by being part of this global movement. And I think that's a really important point to remember. It's not just about products and users of products, but about trying new things and about being inspired by one another. And there's so much of that in this space. Tom, you were about to say something and I interrupted you. I'd love to hear what you were going to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Mary Ellen because having those opportunities to meet some of the folks that were close to being our founders or the founders of the organization, and you talk about how they inspire you now. Did you get a sense of what inspired them initially to join, and how it's kind of bridged from then to now?
It's a really great question, and they all always talk about that, because I think for many of the women who were the early founders, um, they were European from often sometimes really privileged backgrounds. And all of them had these incredible trailblazing careers that were often very lonely, because there were not a lot of women in their space. And so, they talk about being able to come together, experience that community. I love that Sonia referred to the organization as a movement. And then, having this camaraderie with, other women, maybe northern women, if you will, and then meeting women in Latin America and Asia, in Africa, who had such similar experiences, and being invited into their homes and meeting their families and hearing how they had struggled to build their businesses. That kind of that realization that you're not alone, and that, again, how much we share rather than how much divides us, seems to have been, enormously important and foundational for them, and something they found in Women's World Banking that they didn't find in other things that they may have been volunteering for or involved in.
It
Yeah.
started out with founders, but then having the network organization, which we continue to be today, I guess one of the few standing, where you still have that ability for leaders to come together, women leaders to come together globally, and have an opportunity to just learn from each other, engage with each other, bond with one another. I mean, we continue to see how powerful it is even today, right? 45 years later.
I've had the real privilege actually to spend a significant amount of time over the past year. I guess this is the question earlier you're asking, a woman who's really inspired you and had a unique story. Mine was a little look back into history because I've had the privilege to spend more time with our founder, Michaela Walsh, this past year, and sharing maybe a handful of old fashions over that period of time together. But the reason why I asked you the question, Mary Ellen, is because I just can't believe, like, it still stuns me how passionate she is, as if it was day one. The way she talks about the history, the pride that she has about us and what we're accomplishing today, and the fact that you get to speak to others who were part of that initial movement. It tells me that we have something special here and something that is really big that we're responsible for that we can't screw up.
Yeah. No, I think that's spot on. Really spot on.
Yeah, this is just the most inspiring part of my job and my favorite part of this podcast recording so far. Tom, we're entering a season of gift giving. If you were to open a gift that's a magic wand, what would that magic wand do to change global financial systems for women?
Magic wand, I think. Yeah, for me, I think it's the regulatory change. I think if this is the type of behavior and access that needs to be forced, can be forced globally. And we have these global infrastructures and systems that are designed right now to exclude. And if I could wave a magic wand, it would be about that. There's the reason why regulation exists. There's a reason why policies are adopted and implemented. There's a reason why there's carrots and sticks. And I just think the way the system is structured right now could be redesigned and mandated. We're still going to have to earn the trust of those who've been excluded because we've done an injustice to them for so many decades, millennials, but we're in a situation that it could really change as we move forward. I don't know, Harsha.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I think that's a good one, actually, Tom. I was trying to think about this one. I mean, if we could make a wish come true, maybe having every individual on the planet have a universal digital wallet that they have access to, that they can save in, that they can, have purchase insurance, whatever financial services, needs they have and solutions they have, this digital wallet, can service. Difficult to do, but I mean, we're talking about, dreams and wishes here, right? So that might be one.
That's a really good one.
Yeah, and I think even with that wallet, there's an opportunity to make it smart financing, have the opportunity to have embedded tools that help people make decisions, have awareness of where their exposure is. There's, especially with the use of AI at this point, there's no reason why you can't make financial education and financial trust easier for everyone.
Tom, I think that's absolutely critical. If digital is the way to go, which it is, the Sonia said the train has left the station there. The information has to go hand in hand with the technology. The especially low income individuals, who may not be, as digitally savvy or, have access to the most sophisticated technology, actually have the means and the protections, the knowledge that they're, making these decisions the right way. I mean, we call it DFC, digital financial capability building, having the knowledge, the skills, the attitude. So, it's very much about building the trust. Because once that's eroded, we're done for. So ensuring that, that remains intact is absolutely essential.
In our tech equity program, which brought together regulators and policymakers from all over the world to learn about new technologies that they were kind of afraid of regulating or afraid of leveraging. We found women regulators and policymakers just so aware of their own family members who are entering the financial system for the first time. Maybe it's like their mother or their grandmother. And the financial system they're entering is so different than the one that they entered themselves like 20 years ago. So like if you're going to open an account today, you might not even see a human. You might have to do it on your phone completely with biometrics and the ability to face scan and all of those things. And that's created a totally different world and a totally different set of financial capability needs for women. I think that's a really smart response, is combining wallets and digital with the digital financial capability and education pieces.
And what's awesome about it is it's something that it's a global opportunity. It's something that everybody can relate to and become familiar with because it's happening at the same time. So, you don't have to talk about a situation somewhere else. You can just look at your phone and start to understand it immediately.
Harsha, let me ask you another question. Given your role, you sit in many strategy meetings focused on financial services providers and policymakers and how we might advise them on different products or different policy initiatives. For you, what has been the dream project that you would love to see Women's World Banking take on in the next decade?
Where I think we need to go as an organization, where I think we need to go as an industry, I think financial inclusion, critically important, continues to be critically important. Bank account, using of a bank account, I think critical, but it's one important element of women's economic empowerment. If we really want to solve for this issue, which is what we're about, right? Women's World Banking is working towards women's economic empowerment, the pathway being financial inclusion. If we really want to see change, we're going to need to figure out how to address other major issues that continue to face women: climate shocks, health related issues, the burden of care. Those are aspects of women's life that we need to better understand and figure out, maybe through partnerships, not just all by ourselves, but looking at the intersections between those areas and financial inclusion, to solve for economic empowerment. I don't think we'll get there with just financial inclusion.
That's a big statement. We won't get there with just financial inclusion. Yeah. Any other comments from Mary Ellen and Tom on that, since it is such a big thing to say?
There's been a bit of a movement and a sort of wandering, I think, intellectually in the community in the last year or two around financial wellness, financial health, financial well-being, financial inclusion. I don't necessarily think we need to wander away from that initial path, but we need to widen the path to include, other things that are huge contributors to women's empowerment, women's economic participation and independence. And that, as I was saying earlier, financial inclusion can be an accelerator and a foundation in making those other things achievable.
Yeah.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. I think it's about that holistic approach to understanding women's needs and recognizing that it's all important to financial inclusion. Every decision that she's making throughout the day ties back to participation. And so when you think about the care economies and you think about just agency and empowerment, it all comes back to, a financial position at the end of the day. And, I think the partnership piece that Harsha's talking about is going to be absolutely critical because no one organization can do it by itself. It's going to take all different types of partners. I think we all have to make sure we're not all focusing on our single goal and understand how the collective goal needs to come together. So if we can be, bridge makers, partnership builders, I think Women's World Banking has an opportunity to be a pioneer in that space to really solve this problem.
And now a word from our sponsor. EY applauds Women's World Banking's 45-year legacy empowering women through financial inclusion. Together, we have a common vision to build a better financial services industry, one that is stronger, fairer, and more sustainable. Find out more on ey.com.
Looking back on the achievements made or insights gained, whether by Women's World Banking or in the broader financial community, what has excited each of you the most about 2024 this past year? Mary Ellen, I'd love to start with you on this one.
So this, for me, and I think we're all going to be musing on this same theme, I mean, this was the year that we really showed that scale is possible. And the vision behind our strategic plan had always had this, huge goal of reaching 100 million women with a product or service that they did not previously have access to, because we wanted to be able to move the needle on that billion women who were not adequately served by the formal financial sector. But I think it's safe to say, I mean, I can't put words in my colleague's mouth, but I think it's safe to say that we always saw that as a pretty big goal. And Harsha is always so, so good and disciplined about making us drive roadmaps to things. And when, we had a lot of trouble finding a way to those 100 million women. And the fact that we've hit 82 million women by the third quarter of this year and really do appear to be on track to achieve the goal, fully 2.5 years ahead of our 10-year target is just beyond exciting.
I agree. That's such a big win this year that you achieved, that we achieved together, and one that's definitely worth celebrating. Harsha, how about you? What's excited you most about 2024?
Yeah, I would say, not to repeat what Mary Ellen said, 2024 has been the year of scale. It's what has the dream, the aspirations that we set out with in 2018 have sort of come to fruition, this year. But, why? How did we get here? I think the piece to think about. So, internally, what's been exciting is that the thinking that we had in terms of going regional and setting up teams on the ground, that's really what's been the game changer for us. The ability to be much closer to the women we seek to serve, and therefore work with both policymakers as well as financial service providers, donors, investors, our key stakeholder groups, where we're very much, with them in these markets to be able to drive that kind of impact. So exciting, very exciting, but, not enough. And where we need to go, next is really ensuring that the women that now have access to these solutions are actually using it to their benefit. So, that's the next exciting horizon that we need to continue to work on. It's not that it's new for us, but it's, where we need to sort of double down. I think externally, in terms of the trends that we've seen and what's going on, in multiple markets, I think there's a huge focus on really figuring out how to bridge the credit access gap. I think there's been a lot of great progress on financial inclusion, defined as access to a bank account. I think there's, take any country from India to Indonesia to Nigeria, Kenya, we're seeing progress. Most countries have made, progress in the right direction when it comes to access to a bank account. Usage is still an issue, so we're working, on that. But I think, key piece is around really access to productive credit that would allow women to generate, greater incomes, invest in their businesses, because that's really what's going to allow them to, save, to buy insurance, to have access to pensions and the other, safety net products needed to really make a difference in their lives. So lots of interest in both productive credit and insurance. And I'm looking forward to, some of the interesting stuff that's going to come down the pike, within our own organization.
Let me ask a follow-up question to that. For those in the financial inclusion industry, hearing you say the credit access gap might be a surprise. Like, if they have been hearing about microfinance and very aware of that product, like, what's different about today that the microfinance movement hasn't achieved for us?
I mean, microfinance did a fantastic job, and it continues to do a fantastic job, but it's not enough. There is a huge need that is still unmet. Mostly women are in the informal sector. Microfinance gets to some of them. But as these businesses grow, microfinance is not able to meet those needs. And then you have, other service providers that are now much more able to do that, through fintechs. You've got digital lenders, you've got, state programs. But there may be things out there that don't necessarily work for women. And so that's where we come in, is, ensuring that initiatives, policies, programs digital public infrastructures that are in place actually work for women. That's what's different now. That didn't exist, 10 years, 20 years ago. That's what's changed in the financial services landscape. And, it's a good thing. There's more out there for women to choose from. It just needs to work for them. And that's what, that's why we're around.
Yeah, and maybe that also gets to your scale comment. I mean, microfinance just didn't necessarily hit the scale that that is needed to fill that $1.7 trillion credit gap for women between what they need and what they actually get.
Exactly.
Tom, over to you. What has excited you most about 2024?
Yeah, in a similar vein to Harsha and Mary Ellen and being the operations guy, the recognition of being able to realize a strategy is an incredible feeling, because it has so many implications. It has so many ripple effects. You see it throughout the organization. You see it in the effort that comes from the team. You see it in the M&E of our work, or the monitoring evaluations, the output, the outcomes. And it's been something that, as I reflected on when we kicked off the strategy, right before it actually, there was a huge debate in the organization whether or not we as an organization could achieve the type of scale that we've been talking about. And to be that 2.5 to 3 years ahead on that timeline, it's just a phenomenal feeling, something I think we're all really proud of. And it's especially important, I think, in a time when many in the world feel, or many feel, that the world is moving backwards. We continue to move forward. And to be able to be that bright star and that demonstration, and know that you can accomplish it, especially at a scale that our organization is, I think we set a great example of what can be done when you commit, when you have a clear plan that Mary Ellen talked about, that Harsha helped us articulate, and you have that path and you follow it, you'll achieve. That's what 24 has been a reflection for me.
Yeah, that's great. I'd love to follow up with asking about insights that you've gained in 2024 as well. Like we've talked about what we've achieved, but also what are some of the insights on what's happening in the women's financial inclusion space that you might share with our audience, especially if they're just joining this conversation about women's financial inclusion and economic empowerment. I'm going to go backwards, and Tom, start with you. Like, what's one insight that you gained?
Yeah, I'm going to share an insight that may be perceived as negative, but I think it's important to recognize. And I picked up on it during the conversations we've had this week. There's more conversations taking place where there's an acknowledgement that people aren't, or no longer want to focus on gender, and women as a separate segment. And I think when you think about the partners that we're working with, like our partners actually are people that really get it and are devoted to it. But when we're talking to new partners, it's not that they don't think it's important, but there is this recognition that it has to be a broader, inclusive package. And they aren't necessarily initially seeing the fundamental differences. And I think it's really important that we continue to be a voice that identifies why those differences are important, why we have to pay attention to them, why we have to really commit ourselves to designing for women. The women's participation in the economy is something that is crucial for all of us to care about. It's something that we have an obligation to, and it just makes community stronger. And I don't think we can let people forget that. But it's been a really important awakening for me.
Yeah, sometimes we swim in these women's financial inclusion waters and we just assume everybody's bought in. So it's really interesting to hear the other side as well, and to understand Women's World Banking's role in driving those conversations. Harsha, how about you? What's an insight that you've picked up from 2024?
I would say, on the area of digital financial inclusion, I think there's been a lot of focus on digital, which I think is fantastic. It is the only way to get to scale. It is the only way to reach the last mile. But digital also is a double-edged sword, and I think we need to be really careful. On the one hand, yes, you can get to reaching large numbers very easily at a low cost, but doing it in a responsible way and ensuring that there's proper regulatory oversight, there's consumer protection, There's an understanding of what women are buying, what they're signing up to. What we call digital and financial capability building at Women's World Banking is absolutely critical, because otherwise, there are unintended consequences. I know digital is meant to, we're focused on this in order to be able to get, everybody in the fold. But, there could be issues with over indebtedness. There could be issues around, data privacy. So I think they're important areas for us to focus on. And so while we continue to push towards digital, making sure we focus on these other, topics, I think are going to be really, really essential to be able to, meet the needs.
Yeah, and you're right. One we can't avoid at all, because digital is here. It's not going away. Yeah, yeah. Mary Ellen, what is an insight from 2024 that you are taking with you into your work going forward?
I think some of the most exciting, things that I learned, like really learned for the first time, were some of the insights we had from the data that we collect from our investees as part of the asset management company. It's, we are totally, data junkies in the NGO, and we're always trying to collect as much information. And your team is leading that pack, Sonia. But as a shareholder and often, sitting on the board of these companies, we just have access to so much more information over longer periods of time. And, to see some of the findings of things that we always had a hunch about, but that we're really seeing that, there's been this kind of myth over the years that, women are great repayers of microloans, but the minute they cross over the threshold to small businesses, that they become really bad repayers. But what we found is that with so many of our portfolio companies, they would sort of be meeting some kind of tick the box objective. They got a credit line from some DFI that required them to make, $10 million worth of loans to women-led companies. They would make those loans and then they'd never pay any attention to the companies. And when you started really paying attention to the companies, giving them the customer care that they were already giving to their male customers, you saw repayment rates equalize and even exceed those of men. Similarly, there's just been this pattern for decades of women having smaller loan sizes and being, somehow better able to cope with smaller loan sizes, being more risk averse. And yet we were seeing in our portfolio, as well as in a digital lender here in India that we worked on, that I know you did some important work, that women did just fine with the larger loan size. And in fact, the customer lifetime value for those women customers was 30% higher than it was for the men. So it made total sense for them to be getting the kind of important customer care, getting those larger loan sizes. So I think it's been very exciting to be able to confirm just how strong the business case for serving women customers is with the data coming out of the companies themselves.
Well, as a researcher, I love that data is something that's your 2024 big insight. And you're totally right. In 2024, we disproved these significant myths that are keeping women from accessing credit. And this goes along to Harsh's point about credit being a 2024 finding and insight for her as well. If we are able to get financial services providers over those long held and entrenched myths that is keeping that gender credit gap, or that credit gap for women, at $1.7 trillion, it's going to change everything. It's going to be amazing. So thanks for sharing that insight. Yeah, financial inclusion is not an end in and of itself. It's an enabler of all of the things that women face in their daily life. And that point about the connection to the Sustainable Development Goals, about the relevance of financial inclusion to women feeding their families, sending their children to school, being resilient against climate shocks, creating jobs in their communities. Like, this is tremendously important. And I agree. I think this year really showed us that integrated picture of how women's finance changes every part of their lives. Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And it's something that we have felt as an organization, but I agree. I think this year really, really showed us that value. We've spent this time kind of reflecting on where we are given this moment, sort of at the end of the year, 2024. I'd like to just, Mary Ellen, let you have the last word thinking to the future. So looking forward to 2025, what should our listeners pay close attention to in the fight to make finance work for women? Like, what's top of mind for women's world banking in 2025?
So I think the answers to those two things actually are a little different. I think if I were, urging vigilance on those of us who are coming to the fight, I would say, let's be really, really attentive to anything that might look like backsliding. And I am still kind of reeling a bit from, that wonderful trip I had to Switzerland, but I also heard many European governments talking about, reducing development cooperation and what was left in that budget as a result of our elections in the States. Much of the balance was going to be directed to Ukraine. We saw the OECD numbers come out that spending for gender equality purposes had fallen for the first time in 8 years. So we just have to be really, really attentive to making sure that we don't fall back, and that we recognize how essential women's economic independence and empowerment are, to all of those other goals that we've been talking about on this conversation. So with that in mind, and with that, that attention, I'm really excited about starting to form the partnerships and go down that path on so much more of this holistic approach, as Tom said, in 2025. I'm also very excited that a growth strategy for our asset management company is really going full steam ahead. I say that with hopefully a board meeting later today that will approve the next steps in that strategy. But really excited about a goal that we set through that strategy of having $1 billion under management by the end of this century. But really putting that strategy for growth, we are having such an outsized impact in the way companies that we're investing in are serving women customers, are doing that as gender diverse organizations, seeing incredible correlation between gender diversity at every level of an organization and the ability to serve more women clients. That being an investor is a critical part of our future, and I'm really excited that we're going to be able to kind of jumpstart some of that in the coming year.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's something I mentioned in the intro to this podcast. Is 2024 felt like a year of gender lens investing to me, with the Global Gender Smart Fund being launched. I'm so excited for 2025 to see what that excitement achieves in the world, very practically, and really thrilled to hear that Women's World Banking is in those conversations at that table. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. I know joining at the end of a long week in the evening in India, or it's even dark for you, is not easy. And I'm just so grateful for you taking a minute with me to reflect on 2024 and also think to the future. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to our guests. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Here are some of the things I'm taking away from that conversation. First, in the words of Lin-Manuel Miranda, this is not a moment, it's a movement. This is a global movement. We're not talking about individual products necessarily. We're talking about a global community coming together to solve problems. And that might be through products, that might be through policy, that might be through investments. And so I'm just excited about that. I love systems thinking, and the conversation really jazzed me from that perspective. We also heard women know what they want. We're not conferring economic empowerment on women. We are creating tools and opportunities for women to achieve what they want. And they're the ones making the decision about their goals, about their needs. We also heard along those lines that finance is important, but what it does is critical. It enables health. It enables dependent care opportunities. It enables climate resilience. It enables job creation. We also heard we're not going to reach our goals with just financial inclusion alone. In terms of partnerships, we really need to widen the path to include other things to achieve women's security and prosperity. And looking forward to the future, partnerships going to be essential. I mean, it is the last sustainable development goal. We've always known that, but we're really feeling that right now. And finally, we need to be attentive to anything that looks like backsliding. For example, financial inclusion as an afterthought in funding decisions, in projects, rather than it being central. It has to be central in order to work. It is an enabler, which means you can't just tack it on at the end. Backsliding might also look like access without use, bank accounts that sit unopened, insurance policies that don't actually result in claims, savings opportunities that aren't taken advantage of, credit that's just sitting there waiting for women to take advantage of it. And so that's a big one. And we're really looking forward to 2025. We're really going to be watching this space of partnerships, finance enabling new things for women, or us realizing it is enabling things and therefore kind of tailoring products to that reality. Now, we've kept our conversation mostly focused on good news and celebration, but if I were to urge you to take one action to get smart on financial inclusion issues, it would be around climate. You can go to womensworldbanking.org and download our recent publication, which is called Finance, Climate, and Gender, to learn more and see what can be done at this critical intersection of women's financial inclusion and climate change. Climate change doesn't take a pause over the holidays. I'm feeling that where I live. It usually is quite snowy, and it's not snowy right now. I've actually seen some rain. And this is something that you're probably feeling in your market if you look at your season on average. Also, many of us are thinking about our year-end giving, myself included. We've actually never talked about giving on here, but this is the moment to do it, I think. I personally give to Women's World Banking each year. I hope you might consider making a donation to our work. You can do so by visiting our website at womensworldbanking.org. Between now and the end of the year, all donations are being matched up to $25,000, and every little bit helps us. So please help us to reach this match. Help us to do this good work for women's security and prosperity. And finally, if you found today's discussion valuable, don't forget to subscribe, to rate, to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback really matters to us, and it helps us bring you the content that resonates. So please stay engaged, stay informed, and we look forward to connecting with you in our next episode in the new year in January.